On the night before my wedding, I opened the wrong door and found my groom, the Duke, locked in a kiss with my own sister. The gown, the vows, the future I dreamed of, shattered in an instant. But when I thought humiliation would end me, his powerful cousin rose in front of the court and declared, "If she was meant for a duke, she deserves nothing less than a king, and I will be that for her."
The night air was thick with the scent of roses and beeswax candles, a heady sweetness that clung to every corridor of the manor. Evelyn stood before the mirror in her chamber, her breath catching at the sight of the gown draped carefully across the velvet chaise. White silk shimmered in the lamplight, delicate lace edging the bodice like frost spun from moonlight. She reached out, fingertips trembling, brushing against the fabric as though it might vanish if she touched it too boldly. Tomorrow she would walk down the aisle as a bride. Tomorrow she would become a duchess. Her heart fluttered at the thought. She had spent years dreaming of this moment, her escape from a quiet life, her chance to stand in a place of honor. Bryce had chosen her when he could have chosen any of the noble daughters who lined the halls of court with hungry smiles. To her, it had felt like destiny, like a secret vow written in the stars. She pressed her palm to her chest, whispering softly, "Tomorrow I will belong." But beneath her excitement there lingered unease, a restless energy that made her rise from her seat and pace across the rug. The manor was quiet, too quiet. Laughter from the day's endless preparations had faded into silence. And Bryce, her groom, her future, had not come to see her. Not even a word slipped beneath her door, not even a stolen note to soothe her nerves. The thought made her frown, her chest tightening with a doubt she quickly tried to banish. Still, she couldn't stay still. She needed to see him, even for a moment. She needed reassurance that tomorrow's promises were real. Gathering her shawl around her shoulders, she slipped from her chamber, the soft padding of her slippers muffled by the stone floor. The corridor stretched long and dimly lit, shadows dancing with each flicker of the torches. She knew she shouldn't wander, not when propriety demanded distance until vows were spoken, but her heart begged her to go. The halls smelled of wax and old wood, every corner familiar, and yet tonight strangely foreboding. Her breath echoed too loudly, and with every step she felt as if the silence were pressing in on her. Somewhere deeper in the manor, faint voices carried, low, hushed, urgent. She paused, heart stuttering, recognizing one voice instantly. Bryce. Relief flooded her, and she quickened her steps, eager to see him, eager to hear him say her name and banish her fears. But as she drew closer, another sound joined his. The soft laugh of a woman, a laugh she knew as well as her own heartbeat. Juliana, her sister. Evelyn froze, fingers tightening on her shawl until her knuckles ached. She should have turned back, should have closed her ears and fled. But her feet moved as if drawn by a string, pulling her toward the half-open door at the end of the hall. Candlelight spilled out in trembling gold, shadows shifting against the walls. She edged closer, her breath shallow, until the truth was no longer hidden. There they stood. Bryce, her groom, his hands tangled in Juliana's dark hair, his mouth pressed to hers with a hunger Evelyn had once believed was hers alone. Her sister's fingers clutched at his collar, pulling him closer, their kiss fierce, unrestrained. The world cracked. Evelyn's chest seized, the breath knocked from her as if she had been struck, the sound of their lips meeting, the soft sighs between them, cut through her like glass. She clapped a hand to her mouth, desperate to smother the cry rising in her throat. But the betrayal was too sharp, too raw. Her vision blurred with tears as the silk gown in her chamber flashed in her mind. Mockery now, nothing more than a costume for a play she had never been meant to star in. Her sister, her groom. The two people she trusted most entwined in a secret meant to be hers. She stumbled back, the floor tilting beneath her feet. The door creaked, and she fled before they could see her. Her slippers struck the stones, quick, uneven, carrying her down the hall like prey running from a predator. Candle flames blurred into streaks, the air thick with smoke and sorrow. Her shawl slipped from her shoulders, trailing behind her, forgotten. Her heartbeat roared in her ears, drowning out everything else. Every step was a question, a scream, a wound. How could he? How could she? How could I have been so blind? Her tears fell hot, stinging her cheeks. Her breath breaking in sobs, she tried and failed to silence. She pressed a hand to the wall, steadying herself as the corridor stretched on endlessly, cruel and cold. Shadows leapt at her from every corner, whispering secrets of her humiliation. Tomorrow she had imagined herself a duchess. Now she was nothing but a fool draped in shame. At last she collapsed against a pillar, her knees weak, the taste of salt sharp on her lips. She slid down until she sat on the floor, wrapping her arms around herself as if to hold the pieces of her heart together. The silence pressed in, heavier than before, thick with betrayal. Her dream was gone, shattered in an instant. And yet, a shiver ran through her as though the halls themselves were watching, bearing witness to her despair. She wiped her cheeks, forcing her breath steady. Somewhere in the shadows, unseen eyes lingered. Somewhere her story had shifted. She could not know it yet, but fate had already stirred. What would you do if you caught your groom kissing someone else the night before your wedding? The night dragged into silence, though Evelyn's mind could find no rest. Back in her chamber, the shadows seemed heavier, the corners darker. She pressed her back against the door after locking it, sliding down until the cold wood steadied her trembling spine. Her breath shuddered in and out, ragged and shallow, as tears fell onto her silken skirts. She had never felt so small, so utterly humiliated. Tomorrow the court would gather, a sea of expectant faces turned toward her, waiting to see the perfect bride walk with grace toward her duke. And yet tomorrow held nothing but shame. The thought made her curl in on herself, arms wrapped tight as if she could shield her heart from its breaking. What if the truth escaped before the vows were spoken? What if whispers slithered through the noble halls, painting her as blind, as weak, as pitiful? The sting of humiliation pressed harder than the betrayal itself. Her thoughts tangled, catching on the image of Juliana, her stepsister, not bound by blood but bound by years of rivalry and unspoken bitterness. Juliana had always been the one with the sharper smile, the glint in her eyes that dared anyone to challenge her. Where Evelyn had sought peace, Juliana thrived in chaos. Where Evelyn longed for affection, Juliana demanded admiration. They had shared the same roof for most of their lives, yet Evelyn had never shaken the sense that Juliana's every gesture carried envy like a concealed blade. And now, that blade had pierced its mark. Juliana wanted what Evelyn had been given: the duke, the crown, the adoration of a watching world. And she had stolen it in the cruelest way possible, not just with temptation, but with deliberate hunger. Evelyn could see it now, the tilt of her stepsister's chin, the smirk behind her kiss, the triumph in knowing she had shattered Evelyn's heart. Evelyn pressed her forehead to her knees, nails digging into her arms. The pain of betrayal was sharp, but beneath it simmered something new, something dangerous. Anger. Not the fleeting spark of annoyance she had felt so many times growing up beside Juliana, but a heavy flame that burned deep. For the first time, Evelyn felt the rise of something other than sorrow. Bryce's face returned to her mind, handsome and shallow in equal measure. He had never been cruel, but neither had he been brave. He bowed to tradition, to politics, to pressure. The Duke's smile had always been polished, his words rehearsed, his hand offered as though it were a favour rather than devotion. She had ignored the hollow echo behind his gaze, the way his eyes sometimes wandered. Now she could no longer pretend. He was weak enough to surrender to temptation, weak enough to risk destroying her with him. Somewhere in the depth of the manor, laughter rang again. Perhaps servants drinking to tomorrow's celebration, perhaps Juliana still reveling in her conquest. Evelyn forced herself to rise, wiping her face, though her reflection in the mirror was pale and marked by tears. And it was then, as she moved toward the window for air, that she felt it. Eyes on her. She turned sharply, heart hammering, but the chamber was empty. Only the faint ripple of curtain fabric moved with the night breeze. Still, she could not shake the sensation that someone had been watching, not with malice, but with unnerving intent. In another wing of the manor, Justin stood with a glass of dark wine in hand, his gaze fixed on the moonlight spilling across the courtyard. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in black, he looked every bit the man people whispered about, the Duke's cousin, the true heir of greater fortune and more formidable influence. Where Bryce carried his title like a fragile crown, Justin bore his authority like a weapon. Feared in court, respected by kings, untouchable in wealth, he needed no fragile alliances to secure his place. He had always regarded Evelyn as little more than a naive girl swept into a world she didn't understand, fragile, polite, too eager to believe in fairy tales. He had dismissed her with the same disinterest he afforded most things that bored him. But tonight he had seen her break. He had been in the shadows when she fled the corridor, her shawl trailing behind like a discarded promise. He had seen her face, raw with tears, and for the first time, something in him shifted. Justin sipped his wine, eyes narrowing. He was not a man swayed by softness, yet the image of her trembling form lingered. Her grief was too pure to ignore, her humiliation too sharp. It unsettled him, gnawed at the edge of his composure. Why should he care? What was she to him but the foolish bride of his cousin? And yet, the way she had looked, wounded, shattered, struck something buried deep. His jaw tightened. Bryce was weak. Justin had long despised that weakness, though until now it had been no more than contempt. But to wound Evelyn so openly, to let her fall before the court as little more than a pawn, was something he could not watch without consequence. Across the courtyard, Evelyn's candlelight flickered against her chamber window. Justin studied it as though the flame itself carried her heartbeat. He set his glass aside, the weight of decision heavy in his chest. He had always believed her fragile. Tonight he had seen her strength even in her breaking. She had not stormed into the hall to rage. She had not fallen to the ground in hysterics. She had swallowed her pain and fled in silence, dignity in her despair. It unsettled him more than her tears. Juliana, meanwhile, stood in front of her own mirror, lips still tingling from Bryce's kiss. She smiled at her reflection, running her fingers along her throat as if tracing the power she had stolen. Evelyn had always been favoured for her gentleness, her quiet beauty. Now Juliana had claimed something greater, the Duke's affection. The triumph glowed in her eyes, sharpened by the thought of watching Evelyn crumble. She whispered to herself a promise, a vow. Tomorrow will not belong to her, it will belong to me. And Bryce, he sat slumped in a chair, head in his hands, the weight of what he had done pressing at his skull. Yet, even in shame, he could not summon the strength to undo it. He thought of Evelyn's kindness, her unwavering faith in him, and for a moment his heart twisted with regret. But the memory of Juliana's lips silenced it. He was not strong enough to resist. He never had been. Back in her chamber, Evelyn stood alone, her hand pressed against the glass as if searching the night sky for answers. Her fears tumbled through her. Humiliation, disgrace, the collapse of her tomorrow. She thought of how the court would laugh if they knew. She thought of her stepmother's cold, sharp eyes, ready to blame her for failing to hold a man's loyalty. And most of all, she thought of Justin, the powerful cousin who had always looked at her as though she were a child playing dress-up. The idea of him seeing her broken made her want to disappear, but what she did not know was that he had already seen her, and that her sorrow had awakened something in him he could neither name nor deny. Morning dawned with a sky the colour of pewter, the sun hidden behind heavy clouds as if even heaven hesitated to bless the day. Evelyn stood in front of the mirror where her wedding gown waited, the silk catching the faint light like an unspoken promise. Her eyes, swollen from a night of tears, held no joy now. She pressed her trembling hands together, inhaling a long, unsteady breath. She had dreamed of walking down the aisle, of smiling through a veil as vows bound her to a man she thought she knew. But that dream was gone, and she would not play the fool before the eyes of court. With a voice steadier than she expected, Evelyn called the wedding off. The words left her lips in the presence of her father, stepmother, and the attendants, their gasps rising like a tide. Yet none dared question her. She was old enough, the bride herself, and her decision could not be undone. The household rushed to contain the whispers, but whispers have wings. Servants whispered to merchants, merchants whispered to neighbours, and by noon the noble court hummed with scandal. Rumours slithered through parlours and gardens that Evelyn had been betrayed, that Bryce's loyalty had faltered. The Duke's name was stained, but so too was Evelyn's. Some said she had failed to hold his heart, that she was weak, fragile, unworthy. Others claimed she had been blind, humiliated before her own blood. Every tale twisted tighter around her, threatening to strangle her reputation before it could even bloom. Juliana, standing before her own mirror, smiled as she listened to the gossip. Her stepsister's shame was her triumph. Where Evelyn faltered, Juliana sought to rise. She whispered into ears with practiced sweetness, hinting that perhaps she could salvage the family's honour by taking Evelyn's place. If Bryce still wanted a bride, she was ready, willing, eager. The thought of wearing the crown meant for Evelyn lit a dangerous hunger in her eyes. Evelyn, meanwhile, paced her chamber with restless steps. Every whisper seemed to seep through the walls, every rumour a dagger aimed at her back. She pressed her palms to her temples, desperate to block it out. Shame had already burned her once. She could not face the jeers of the court again. For the first time in her life she considered running, fleeing the manor, fleeing her family, leaving behind everything she had once longed for. Better to vanish into obscurity than to be paraded as a broken bride. Her hand touched the latch of her chamber door, her heart pounding with the thought of escape. But fate was not done with her yet. That evening, the great hall filled with nobles and courtiers summoned by the stir of scandal. The air was thick with perfume and tension, voices buzzing like hornets, each eager for the kill. Evelyn stood at the edge, pale and trembling, her shawl drawn tight as though it could hide her. Bryce avoided her eyes, his jaw tight, while Juliana lingered near him, her smile sharp as glass. And then Justin stepped forward. The room fell into silence, as though even the chandeliers bent to his will. He was a figure carved from shadow and authority, his presence commanding without effort. His gaze swept the hall, silencing every whisper, every smirk. His voice cut through the air, deep and unyielding. If she was meant for a duke, she deserves nothing less than a king, and I will be that for her. Gasps echoed like thunderclaps. Faces blanched, others flushed. The declaration rang through the hall, impossible to misinterpret. He had not only silenced the rumours, he had claimed Evelyn, elevating her above every jeer, every doubt. Evelyn's breath caught in her chest, her world tilting. His words were a shield, but they were also a chain. Was he protecting her honour or binding her to himself? The question struck her harder than any whisper ever could. Juliana's smile faltered, her triumph slipping through her fingers like sand. Bryce clenched his fists, powerless, his weakness exposed before all. And Evelyn stood frozen, her heart torn between relief and terror, between gratitude and suspicion. The hall erupted in murmurs, yet none dared speak against Justin. He was too powerful, too commanding, his will carved into stone. From that moment, Evelyn's path was no longer her own. Fate had shifted, and with it, her story. Do you think Justin was protecting her, or claiming her? Tell us in the comments. The manor did not quiet after Justin's declaration. If anything, the halls grew louder, buzzing with whispers that clung to Evelyn's every step. Servants bowed lower, but their eyes lingered longer. Courtiers arrived under the pretense of concern, yet their voices dripped with curiosity, each one eager to claim they had witnessed the scandal unfold. The house, meant to be dressed in joy for a wedding, now held its breath like a stage before a second act. Evelyn tried to vanish into corners, slipping through corridors like a shadow, but it was useless. Every glance, every whispered breath pressed against her ribs. She felt caged, not by walls, but by the weight of expectation. And at the center of that weight stood Justin. He was everywhere, standing at the head of the table during meals, his presence swallowing the room whole, walking the corridors as though he owned every stone. His gaze found hers too easily, too steadily, and she bristled each time. His declaration had silenced the court, yes, but it had bound her name to his. She wondered if he realized the prison he had built around her with those words. One evening, when the storm of whispers grew too sharp to bear, Evelyn confronted him in the library. The firelight painted his sharp features in molten gold, his posture relaxed in a way that mocked her tension. "You had no right," she hissed, voice low but trembling with fury, "to speak for me, to claim me as if I were a prize to be snatched from the hands of gossip." Justin lifted his glass, swirling the red wine within as if her anger were nothing more than background noise. "I did what was necessary. The alternative was your ruin." Her chin lifted, fire sparking in her eyes. "Better ruin on my own terms than salvation at your command." He finally turned to her, eyes narrowing, the weight of his gaze like iron pressing against her. "You think ruin is freedom? You know nothing of what it means to be broken by this court. They would have devoured you whole. And you," she spat back, "would devour me just as surely. You're no different from him, using me to prove your strength, to prove a point." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick as smoke. Then, to her shock, the corner of his mouth twitched into something that was not quite a smile. "You have more fire than I thought, Evelyn." His voice softened, a murmur that unsettled her more than his scorn. "Perhaps that is why I cannot look away." Her breath caught, but she forced her shoulders back, refusing to yield. She turned and left the library, her heart pounding. Yet his words lingered, echoing in her chest, like a forbidden confession. The days pressed forward, the family still bound under the same roof, while the future was debated behind closed doors. At every turn, Evelyn felt the tension coil tighter. Justin did not shield her gently. He stood like a wall, daring anyone to touch her name. Yet he also confronted her at every opportunity, challenging her resolve, provoking her pride. And she could not deny the heat that sparked when his eyes locked on hers, when his voice dipped low with something more dangerous than anger. It infuriated her, it terrified her, and it pulled at her in ways she could not name. In the stillness of midnight, she would remember the way his hand brushed against hers by accident in the corridor, or the way his jaw tightened when Juliana entered the room. She hated the way her body betrayed her, heart leaping at every glance. Bryce, meanwhile, grew desperate. Cornering her one afternoon in the garden, he caught her wrist, his voice a frantic whisper. "Evelyn, please, listen to me. It was a mistake. A moment's weakness. She lured me. You know how she is." Evelyn yanked her hand free, her gaze hard. "You kissed her. You chose her. Do not insult me by blaming your weakness on her ambition." His face twisted, shame warring with anger. "You think Justin is any better? He only wants you to spite me, to prove he is stronger. He doesn't care for you." Her palm cracked against his cheek before he could finish. The sound echoed, sharp as a blade. Bryce staggered, eyes wide with shock. "I would rather be claimed by a man who does not care for me than betrayed by one who pretended to," she said coldly, her voice trembling with the weight of her rage. She turned and left him standing there, his pride crumbling like dust. Still, his words lingered in her chest, needling at the doubts she already carried. Was Justin protecting her, or was she merely another weapon in his endless war for dominance? The court did not stop whispering. If anything, the scandal only sharpened. Ladies tittered behind painted fans, speculating on the Duke's betrayal, on Evelyn's shame, on Justin's bold declaration. Some whispered admiration for her. She has caught the attention of the most powerful man in court. Others sneered, certain she had schemed her way into his grasp. Evelyn bore their eyes like stones pressing against her back. Yet, in the silence between confrontations, something shifted. She found herself alone with Justin in the music room one evening, the faint strains of a harp lingering in the air from where her hands had stumbled across the strings. He stood near the window, the moonlight tracing his broad frame, his expression unreadable. "You are wasted on fear," he said suddenly, his voice low. She turned, startled. "And you are drunk on pride." His lips curved faintly, though his eyes stayed hard. "Perhaps, but pride has its uses. Fear does not." Her heart pounded, heat rising in her cheeks. "You don't understand. You've never had everything ripped from you in a single night." For a moment, something raw flickered in his gaze. He stepped closer, the air between them tightening. "You're wrong," he said softly. "I know exactly what that feels like." Evelyn froze, searching his eyes. For the first time, the coldness there cracked, revealing a depth she had not expected. The silence stretched, not heavy this time, but fragile, something that could break into pieces if either of them moved too quickly. She looked away first, her hands trembling against the strings of the harp. But her heart no longer beat the same. Something dangerous had begun to grow between them. The storm broke in Evelyn's chest the night she found Justin in the study, firelight pooling around him like a crown of embers. He leaned over a desk scattered with parchment, his strong hands braced against polished wood, the tension in his shoulders speaking volumes. His presence filled the room, commanding as always, yet this time she did not flinch from it. "You've been watching me," she accused softly, her voice shaking though her eyes burned steady. He looked up, gaze sharp as steel. "And you've been avoiding me." She swallowed, heart pounding. "Why? Why do you insist on binding yourself to me? Why speak those words before the court if all you meant was to silence them?" His jaw tightened, and for a long moment she thought he would not answer. But then his voice came, low and fierce. "Because Bryce is weak. I have despised his weakness my entire life. He was never fit to wear a crown, never fit to carry a name that meant something. And when he betrayed you, I would not stand by and watch him drag you down with him." Evelyn blinked, breath catching. His words cut deeper than she expected. She had assumed his intervention was strategy, a calculation to maintain the family's dignity. But this sounded like something else. "You despised his weakness," she echoed, "but that doesn't explain why you chose me." His eyes locked on hers, hard, unwavering. "It was not only to protect you. It was because I could not bear the sight of you ruined for his mistakes." Her chest tightened, a strange heat blooming in her veins. The walls she had built against him trembled under the weight of those words. For a long moment silence settled, broken only by the crackle of fire. Evelyn stepped closer, her hands twisting in front of her gown. "You don't understand. I have always been afraid." Her voice cracked, soft but unrelenting. "Afraid that I am too quiet, too plain, too fragile. That I will never be enough for the life they expect of me. That I will never be enough for anyone." The confession bled from her lips before she could stop it. She had never voiced it aloud, not even to herself. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but she did not look away. Justin's gaze softened, something unguarded flickering beneath the steel. He stepped forward, closing the space between them until the heat of him pressed against her senses. His hand hovered near hers, close enough to touch, but not daring. "You think yourself fragile," he murmured. "But I see fire in you, the kind that does not fade. I have never trusted love, Evelyn. Never. It is a game of power, a tool used to chain men and women alike. But with you," his voice faltered, the honesty in it shaking even him. "With you it feels like something else, something I do not understand and cannot ignore." Her breath caught, her heart beating in frantic rhythm. For the first time, she saw the man behind the cold walls, a man who carried scars unseen, who spoke of mistrust, not out of arrogance but out of wounds buried deep. The distance between them shrank. His fingers brushed against hers, tentative, trembling with a weight she had never expected from him. Her eyes fluttered shut as his forehead leaned closer, his breath mingling with hers. A heartbeat, a single breath, and their lips hovered so close the world stilled. The door burst open, Juliana's voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Well, isn't this convenient?" she sneered, stepping into the study, her eyes glittering with venom. The abandoned bride and the proud cousin, whispering confessions in the dark. Evelyn stumbled back, face pale, her breath shattering. Justin straightened, his expression a mask of steel once more, though fury burned in his eyes. Juliana's smile was cold, triumphant. "The court will love this. Poor Evelyn. too humiliated by one duke, desperate enough to throw herself at another. How quickly her shame turns to scandal. "No," Evelyn whispered, shaking her head, panic flooding her veins. She could already hear the whispers, already feel the sting of judgment. Scandal could destroy her before she ever found her footing again. Justin stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "Leave." But Juliana only smirked, turning on her heel, her skirts swirling like smoke. "Oh, I will," she purred, "straight to the court." The door slammed behind her, the echo rattling through Evelyn's chest. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her body trembling. "She'll ruin me," she whispered. "She'll tell them all, and they'll believe her. They always do." Justin's hand clenched at his side, fury radiating from him. "Let her try. I will silence every voice that dares speak against you." But Evelyn shook her head, tears brimming. "And what will they say of me then? That I hide behind your shadow? That I tempt you in secret? Every step I take becomes another chain." Her voice cracked, despair lacing through her words. Justin reached for her, his hand brushing her arm, grounding her even as she shook. "You are not a chain, Evelyn. You are the only thing in this house that feels real." Her breath caught at the rawness in his tone, her heart torn between fear and longing. Yet the stakes had shifted. What had begun as whispers in corridors now threatened to ignite into open scandal. Every glance, every touch, every confession would be weighed and twisted. And in the center of it all stood Evelyn, her reputation hanging by a thread, her heart pulled between the safety she feared and the dangerous love she could no longer deny. The storm Juliana had promised arrived quickly. By dawn the next morning, rumors poured through the manor like a flood. Evelyn, once spoken of with pity or admiration, was now named with scorn. Whispers slithered through every corridor, curling into every chamber. She ensnared Justin. She schemed to climb higher when Bryce rejected her. A clever little temptress, feigning heartbreak to catch the greater prize. It was Juliana who lit the fire, her tongue dipped in poison, her beauty cloaked in false innocence. Standing in parlours with trembling lashes and hushed tones, she painted Evelyn as cunning, desperate, deceitful. She wept as though wounded herself, murmuring that she had only tried to comfort Bryce when Evelyn turned cold and calculating. Bryce, weak and eager to preserve his own pride, echoed her lies. "She played us both," he insisted to anyone who would listen. "Juliana was a victim of her jealousy. Evelyn never wanted me, she wanted power." The tale spread swiftly, too swiftly. Where once Evelyn had been the wronged bride, she was now the schemer, the ambitious wolf hidden in lamb's skin. The court, eager for drama, swallowed the lies whole, and when Evelyn entered a room, heads turned sharply, voices dropped, and laughter echoed like knives. Even family members began to waver. Her stepmother, eyes sharp with disappointment, pulled her aside in a hallway. "I warned you not to be too soft," she hissed, "and now look, your softness has become slyness in their eyes. Do you understand the damage you've done?" Evelyn's lips parted, a protest trembling on her tongue. But the words crumbled before they could form. There was no convincing those who had already chosen to believe the worst. What cut deepest was Justin's silence. He had been her shield, her unexpected saviour, his presence enough to silence 100 whispers. But as the storm grew, he withdrew. He did not come to her chamber door. He did not cross her path in corridors. In public gatherings he remained a dark pillar at a distance, his eyes unreadable, his lips sealed. She knew he was doing it for her, knew that his silence was his strategy, an attempt to keep the flames from spreading further. But without him, she felt naked, alone. At night she sat by the window of her chamber, staring at the moonlit gardens below. Her tears came silently now, no sobs, only salt sliding down her cheeks as despair hollowed her. The gown once meant for her wedding lay folded away, a ghost haunting her. She pressed her face into the fabric some nights, breathing in the faint scent of roses, and asked herself how it had all unravelled so quickly. In the great hall, whispers grew louder. Juliana glided through with triumphant grace, her hand brushing against Bryce's arm, their eyes lingering on one another in false devotion. Together they told their tale, their voices rising with each retelling, until even those who once pitied Evelyn began to sneer. She is clever, one noblewoman murmured, her fan hiding her smile. Too clever for her own good, another replied. Imagine plotting to trap Justin of all men. Arrogance, nothing less. The words stung worse than blows. Evelyn fled the hall, her skirts swishing around her legs, her hands shaking. She pressed herself against a stone pillar in the quiet corridor beyond, her breath breaking. It was not only that they believed the lies, it was that Justin's absence allowed them to. Without his voice, her own was nothing. She sought him once, desperate for an answer. She found him in the stables, his hands brushing the mane of a restless horse. His back was turned, his broad shoulders outlined in the golden spill of lantern light. For a moment she simply stared, willing him to turn, to speak, to remind her she was not as alone as she felt. "Justin," she whispered. He turned, his eyes dark, unreadable. He opened his mouth, but whatever words he carried were swallowed back. His jaw tightened, and he shook his head slightly. Not now. The words cut sharper than any blade. Her heart fractured, the silence between them heavy as stone. She turned and fled before he could see the tears rise. That night, Evelyn lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling as her world pressed down on her. She had been humiliated by betrayal, then lifted by unexpected devotion, only to be cast into deeper shadows. Every path forward seemed closed. Her name was ruined, her place in court unsteady, her family ashamed, her stepsister triumphant, and Justin, oh Justin, absent when she needed him most. By dawn, her despair had reached its breaking point. She walked the gardens alone, the air cold against her skin, her shawl drawn tight. The horizon stretched pale and endless before her. Beyond the hills lay other lands, other cities, places where her name might mean nothing. Perhaps she could vanish there. Perhaps she could shed this skin of shame and start anew. Her hand brushed the iron gate at the edge of the grounds, fingers curling around its chill. Her breath trembled. To leave would mean abandoning everything. Her family, her dignity, her chance at love. But to stay meant being crushed under lies she could not fight. Her knees weakened, her forehead pressing against the cold iron. "I have lost everything," she whispered to the dawn. A sob broke free, raw and unguarded, and she slid to the ground, her skirts pooling around her. The dew dampened the fabric, the chill sinking into her bones. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with grief. For the first time, she truly believed she had no future here. No love, no honor, no hope. Only despair. Justin had always prided himself on discipline, on silence where others blustered, on stillness where others panicked. Yet as the days passed, his silence cut deeper than he anticipated. Each time he saw Evelyn's pale face in the corridor, her eyes lowered as whispers nipped at her heels, something twisted in his chest. Each time she turned away, shoulders bowed beneath shame that was not hers, his own restraint felt less like protection and more like cruelty. Late one night, as the manor slept, he sat alone in his chamber, the fire dwindling to embers. Her voice haunted him, the tremble when she had whispered his name in the stables. He had turned her away then, convincing himself it was for her safety. But the memory of her hurt had carved itself into him. For a man who had spent his life despising weakness, he had discovered a new kind of cowardice, his own. He rose abruptly, the chair scraping across stone. Enough. He could not watch her be destroyed while his silence held him prisoner. If the court wanted war, he would give them one, but Evelyn would not stand alone, not again. He found her in the garden just before dawn, seated on the stone bench beneath the withering rose arbor. Her shawl was wrapped tightly around her, but the chill in her face came not from the cold. Her eyes were hollow, her hands folded neatly in her lap as though she were bracing herself for disappearance. "Evelyn," Justin said, his voice rawer than he intended. She startled, lifting her gaze. "Why are you here?" The words were brittle, her strength cracked by too many betrayals. "Have you come to tell me to stay silent while they finish tearing me apart?" He flinched at her bitterness, deserved as it was. Slowly, he stepped closer, until the torchlight from the walls painted his face in gold and shadow. "I came," he said, "because my silence is killing you. and I will not allow it any longer." Her breath trembled, her lips parting in disbelief. He lowered himself to the bench beside her, their shoulders nearly touching, the air between them charged with the words he had buried too long. "I should have spoken sooner," he confessed. "I thought to protect you by keeping distance. But every moment I watched you suffer while I held my tongue, I realized I was protecting no one, least of all you." His hand flexed against his knee, tight with restrained emotion. "Evelyn, I cannot pretend indifference any longer. You are not a pawn in this game. You are everything I did not know I needed." Her throat ached, her eyes stinging with tears. "You can't mean that. You don't trust love. You told me yourself." "And yet here I am," he whispered, leaning closer, his voice trembling with an honesty that frightened even him. "I never trusted love because I had never seen it, not until you. You fight even when you are broken, you burn even when they call you fragile. Evelyn, I cannot stand by and let them destroy you. Not when—" He stopped himself, the words thick in his throat. "Not when I—" Her hand brushed his, timid but steady. "Not when you what, Justin?" His eyes locked with hers, the fire in them stripped bare. "Not when I love you." The words shattered the walls around her heart. For a moment she could only stare, the world spinning. Then the tears fell, hot and unrelenting, but this time they carried not only pain, they carried release. "I am so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid I will never be enough, afraid that even you will see me as weak." He took her trembling hands into his, firm and unyielding. "You are already enough, you are more than enough, and I will stand with you before the court, before the world, no matter what it costs me." For a long, trembling moment, the air between them pulsed with unspoken hunger. His face leaned closer, hers tilted upward, their lips a breath apart. But Evelyn pulled back slightly, shaking her head though her hands clung to his. "If I accept this, if I stand with you, then it cannot only be you fighting. I will not be the timid girl waiting for rescue, not anymore." A slow smile curved across his lips, fierce and proud. "Then stand with me. Not behind me. With me." Strength surged in her chest, a fire that burned away despair. For the first time since the betrayal, she felt her spine straighten, her shoulders lift. She was not a victim. She was not a pawn. She was Evelyn, and she would fight. Together, they began unraveling the lies. Justin revealed the documents he had collected, evidence of Bryce's debts, of his cowardly deals with lesser nobles, proof of his weakness. Evelyn uncovered Juliana's letters, reckless boasts to confidants that betrayed her scheming hand. Piece by piece, the web of deception unraveled beneath their combined resolve. In the quiet of those nights, as they pored over evidence and whispered strategies, their bond deepened. His hand brushing hers as they leaned over parchment, her laughter breaking through the shadows when he allowed a rare jest. It was in those stolen moments that love became not only confession, but reality. Evelyn no longer trembled at the thought of court. She trembled instead when Justin's fingers lingered too long on hers, when his voice softened as he said her name. And Justin, who had once despised weakness, now found his greatest strength in the tenderness she awakened in him. The court still whispered, Juliana still plotted, Bryce still clung to denial, but Evelyn was no longer the woman who had wept at the garden gate, ready to flee. She was reborn in fire and truth, standing beside a man who had chosen her not out of strategy, but out of love. Together, they were ready. The great hall glowed with candlelight, chandeliers spilling gold across marble floors polished for spectacle. Nobles lined the walls, their silken gowns and jeweled cloaks a shimmering sea of judgment. The scent of roses and spiced wine clung to the air, masking the sharper tang of scandal. Evelyn stood near the dais, her palms damp despite the steady rise and fall of her breath. This was it, the moment her fate would be sealed, whether in ruin or redemption. Juliana entered with a flourish, her gown crimson as spilled wine, lips curved in triumph. Beside her, Bryce carried the hollow look of a man desperate to save his pride. They strode into the centre, voices rising loud enough for all to hear. "My lords, my ladies," Juliana said sweetly, her false modesty dripping venom. "It grieves me to speak ill of my own sister, but I can no longer remain silent. Evelyn has played us all. She schemed to bind herself to Justin, weaving her web of lies while She pressed a hand to her chest as though wounded. I was only trying to comfort poor Bryce in his heartbreak. She betrayed him, not the other way around. Murmurs rippled through the hall, sharp as blades. Evelyn's breath hitched, her heart clawing at her chest. Juliana's lies spun easily, wrapping around the crowd like silk threads. Beside her, Bryce lifted his chin, his voice ringing with false conviction. She never wanted me. It was always Justin she hunted. She lured me into weakness, and when I faltered, she pounced. It is her ambition that shames this house, not mine. Gasps rose, whispers thickening like smoke. Evelyn's body trembled, her lips parting to protest, but her words caught in her throat. How could she fight a storm this vast, this rehearsed? And then Justin stepped forward. The hall stilled, silence shattering the chorus of whispers as his presence cut through the crowd. He stood taller than all, his dark cloak trailing behind him, his expression carved from steel. His gaze swept the hall once, silencing even the boldest tongues, before landing firmly on Juliana and Bryce. Enough. His voice boomed, deep and commanding, echoing from the stone walls. Do not dare lay your sins at her feet. The crowd shifted uneasily as he strode forward, every step deliberate, his eyes burning with fire. He stopped at Evelyn's side, his hand brushing against hers for only an instant, a silent promise. You call her schemer. His gaze speared Bryce. You, who could not remain faithful even a single night before your vows. You who traded loyalty for lust, then dressed your cowardice in lies. His words struck like thunder, Bryce shrinking beneath the weight of them. He turned on Juliana, his tone cutting sharper. And you, poison in silks, you would drag your own sister's name into the mud to cloak your ambition. Did you think your letters would not surface? Your boasts of victory, your words dripping with scorn? You exposed yourself long before tonight. Juliana paled, her lips parting as the hall erupted in startled murmurs. Eyes darted toward her, suspicion curdling admiration into disgust. Justin lifted his voice above the chaos. Evelyn is no schemer. She is no temptress. She is the only woman in this hall with the courage to stand unbroken despite betrayal and lies. And I will say it here before all of you. She is not only worthy of me, she is the only woman I would ever stand beside. Gasps, then silence. His words hung heavy, undeniable, a vow carved into stone. The great hall glowed with candlelight, chandeliers spilling gold across marble floors polished for spectacle. Nobles lined the walls, their silken gowns and jeweled cloaks a shimmering sea of judgment. The scent of roses and spiced wine clung to the air, masking the sharper tang of scandal. Evelyn stood near the dais, her palms damp despite the steady rise and fall of her breath. This was it, the moment her fate would be sealed, whether in ruin or redemption. Juliana entered with a flourish, her gown crimson as spilled wine, lips curved in triumph. Beside her, Bryce carried the hollow look of a man desperate to save his pride. They strode into the centre, voices rising loud enough for all to hear. "My lords, my ladies," Juliana said sweetly, her false modesty dripping venom. "It grieves me to speak ill of my own sister, but I can no longer remain silent. Evelyn has played us all. She schemed to bind herself to Justin, weaving her web of lies while She pressed a hand to her chest as though wounded. I was only trying to comfort poor Bryce in his heartbreak. She betrayed him, not the other way around. Murmurs rippled through the hall, sharp as blades. Evelyn's breath hitched, her heart clawing at her chest. Juliana's lies spun easily, wrapping around the crowd like silk threads. Beside her, Bryce lifted his chin, his voice ringing with false conviction. She never wanted me. It was always Justin she hunted. She lured me into weakness, and when I faltered, she pounced. It is her ambition that shames this house, not mine. Gasps rose, whispers thickening like smoke. Evelyn's body trembled, her lips parting to protest, but her words caught in her throat. How could she fight a storm this vast, this rehearsed? And then Justin stepped forward. The hall stilled, silence shattering the chorus of whispers as his presence cut through the crowd. He stood taller than all, his dark cloak trailing behind him, his expression carved from steel. His gaze swept the hall once, silencing even the boldest tongues before landing firmly on Juliana and Bryce. "Enough!" His voice boomed, deep and commanding, echoing from the stone walls. "Do not dare lay your sins at her feet." The crowd shifted uneasily as he strode forward, every step deliberate, his eyes burning with fire. He stopped at Evelyn's side, his hand brushing against hers for only an instant, a silent promise. "You call her schemer?" His gaze speared Bryce. "You who could not remain faithful even a single night before your vows? You who traded loyalty for lust, then dressed your cowardice in lies?" His words struck like thunder, Bryce shrinking beneath the weight of them. He turned on Juliana, his tone cutting sharper. "And you, poison in silks. You would drag your own sister's name into the mud to cloak your ambition. Did you think your letters would not surface? Your boasts of victory, your words dripping with scorn? You exposed yourself long before tonight." Juliana paled, her lips parting as the hall erupted in startled murmurs. Eyes darted toward her, suspicion curdling admiration into disgust. Justin lifted his voice above the chaos. "Evelyn is no schemer. She is no temptress. She is the only woman in this hall with the courage to stand unbroken despite betrayal and lies. And I will say it here before all of you. She is not only worthy of me, she is the only woman I would ever stand beside." Gasps, then silence. His words hung heavy, undeniable, a vow carved into stone. The seasons turned, and with them the whispers of scandal faded into the past. By the time spring painted the gardens in blooms of white and gold, the court no longer spoke of betrayal, but of triumph, no longer of shame, but of power. Where once Evelyn's name had been paired with pity, it was now spoken with awe. It had been months since that night in the great hall, when truth had silenced lies, and Justin's vow had bound him to her before all. Months in which Evelyn and Justin had walked a path not of illusion, but of truth. They had argued and learned, laughed and faltered, tested and trusted, until their bond grew not out of circumstance, but of choice. Their love was not the fragile dream Evelyn had once clung to with Bryce. It was stronger, forged in fire, built with honesty that cut deeper than any vow. Justin, once a man feared for his coldness, had learned tenderness in her presence. His gaze, once sharp as steel, now softened when it fell upon her. His hands, once used only for command, had become gentle anchors for her heart. And Evelyn, once timid, once fearful of never being enough, now walked with her head held high, her voice steady, her soul alight with courage. Their wedding came at last, not shadowed by shame, but blazing with devotion. The great hall was transformed once more, this time not into a stage for gossip, but into a cathedral of light. Golden banners hung from the rafters, roses lined the aisle, and the air was thick with reverence. Nobles filled the seats, yet there were no whispers, no sneers, only the weight of watching history. Evelyn walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory silk, her veil glimmering like starlight. Yet it was not the gown that drew the awe of the crowd. It was her. Her posture proud, her steps steady, her eyes glowing with the quiet fire of a woman who had survived ruin and emerged unbroken. Justin waited at the altar, his broad frame adorned in black and gold, his presence commanding as ever. But when his eyes found hers, the hardness melted, leaving only devotion. His lips curved faintly, a smile meant for her alone, and Evelyn felt her chest swell with joy so fierce it nearly stole her breath. When their vows were spoken, they were not the rehearsed lines of duty. They were raw, personal, cut from the marrow of their souls. "I vow," Justin said, his voice low yet carrying through the hall, "never to silence you, never to shield you as if you were weak. I vow to stand with you, as my equal, as my heart, as my only truth." "And I vow," Evelyn replied, her voice trembling but strong, "never to hide from you, never to doubt my worth beside you. I vow to walk with you, not as the timid girl I was, but as the woman your love has helped me see. We are not bound by power, Justin. We are bound by choice, my choice. The hall fell silent, moved by the honesty of their words. When they kissed, it was not scandal or spectacle. It was devotion, fierce and eternal. The court erupted in applause, not in whispers, and Evelyn knew this was no longer a dream spun from illusions. It was real. Months passed, and their union only deepened. Evelyn grew into her role not as a duchess by name, but as a woman of influence in her own right. She spoke in councils, advised with wisdom, and held her own in conversations once meant only for men. Justin, for all his pride, listened. He learned. He changed. The man once cloaked in cold ambition now allowed himself to be softened by love, to be warmed by the fire Evelyn carried within her. Juliana remained in the court, her once bright reputation dimmed to a shadow. Evelyn, standing before her one evening, saw the shame etched in her stepsister's downcast eyes. And, though betrayal had nearly destroyed her, Evelyn found her voice soft with forgiveness. "You sought to break me," she said, her tone steady. "But you only taught me to rise. I forgive you, Juliana, but forgiveness will not erase the shame you chose." Juliana's eyes filled with tears, but she bowed her head, unable to meet Evelyn's gaze. Forgiveness had been granted, yet justice remained in the weight of disgrace she would carry forever. Bryce fared worse. Stripped of influence, abandoned by allies, he lingered on the edges of court like a ghost of his former self. The man who had once strutted with charm now walked with hollow eyes, his weakness laid bare for all to see. His downfall was Evelyn's poetic justice, not by her hand, but by the truth of his own choices. One evening, long after the wedding, Evelyn stood with Justin on the balcony of their chambers. The city stretched below, its lights flickering like stars, the night air cool against her skin. Justin's arm was wrapped around her waist, his warmth anchoring her as they gazed into the horizon. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that none of this would have happened if not for betrayal?" He pressed a kiss to her temple, his lips lingering. "Betrayal was the beginning, but you were always destined for more than sorrow." She turned in his arms, her eyes searching his, her heart swelling with certainty. "It feels strange to say it, but betrayal was the doorway. Without it, I might never have seen you, never have seen myself." Justin's lips curved into that rare, tender smile. "And now?" "Now," she whispered, her eyes glistening, "I walk with pride, with love, with you." He kissed her then, slow and certain, a seal on the truth they had built together. Evelyn melted into him, her heart at peace, her spirit soaring. And for the first time in her life, she did not fear tomorrow. Do you believe sometimes heartbreak is the only path to true love? Share your thoughts in the comments.